This time, he focused on creating a car for the masses. After building 20 cars, he finally developed a functional one, which he named Model A. Imagine going back to 1879, a time when trains and horse-drawn carriages moved everything, and the automobile was still just a speculation for the wealthy. Everything changed when a 16-year-old boy left his father's farm and headed to Detroit in pursuit of a dream. Years later, this boy would found his own company and become a key figure in the revolution of the automotive industry. 35 years after his arrival in Detroit, he would make one of the most astute business moves of all time. Half of the cars in the world would bear his name, and he would become one of the richest men in the history of the United States of America. This is his story. He was born on July 30, 1863, on a farm near what is now Dearborn, Michigan, the son of Irish immigrants, William and Mary Ford. He grew up in a rural environment where life revolved around farm work. However, from an early age, Ford showed little interest in following in his family's footsteps on the farm, as he truly disliked being there.
I never had a special love for the farm. It was my mother on the farm whom I loved.
Henry didn't enjoy school either. He preferred to learn on his own and developed a strong interest in mechanics at a very young age. His curiosity about machines led him to study every piece of machinery he could find. At the age of 12, his father gave him a pocket watch. After studying its movements, he learned how to take it apart and reassemble it with precision in just a few minutes. This earned him a reputation as a watch repairman, as he began fixing watches for neighbors, friends, and relatives. When Henry turned 13, he went on a school trip to Detroit, where he saw a steam engine for the first time. It was at that moment that his passion for mechanics turned into an obsession. By the time he was 15, Ford had already built his first steam engine. However, his life took a dramatic turn when he lost his mother to an illness. He had a deep bond with her, and her death left him devastated, heartbroken. His dislike for the farm grew even stronger, and he began searching for a way to escape. At 16, in 1879, Ford packed his belongings and, against his father's wishes, moved to Detroit to seek a new path in life. At the time, Detroit was rapidly becoming an industrial city, and there was a growing demand for young engineers. It was in Detroit that Henry immersed himself in the world of machines and engines. He worked as a machinist apprentice, but it wasn't easy for him. One of his first jobs was at a workshop called Michigan Car Company Works, but he was fired after only 6 days. Those were tough times for him. He was unemployed and sometimes lived day to day, but despite the hardships, Ford continued studying and experimenting with machines whenever he could. By 1882, at the age of 19, Henry Ford decided to return home. Henry still hated the farm and worked very little there, spending most of his time experimenting. Luckily for him, his father had purchased a portable steam engine, which quickly became a novelty among local farmers. He spent most of his time working with this machine and became so skilled that a neighbor in the village paid him $3 to repair their steam engine. News of Ford's talent and gift for working with machines spread throughout Michigan, eventually reaching a representative of the Westinghouse Engine Company of Schenectady, New York, who hired him. Henry's job was to install and service steam engines for tractors across southern Michigan. In 1885, Henry met Clara Jane Bryant at a party, and they married the following year. As a wedding gift, his father gave him 40 acres of land, but instead of farming, Henry had other ideas in mind. In 1891, Henry and Clara moved to Detroit. During this time, Henry discovered the gasoline engine while reading British magazines. This engine was being produced in small quantities in Europe by a German engineer. It was different and much more efficient than steam engines. Very few people in America knew about this engine, but Henry was fortunate to meet someone who owned one. He fell in love with it but didn't understand how it worked. The fact that this engine operated using an electric spark fascinated Henry even more. That same year, Henry began working as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, Detroit's largest electric company at the time, earning $40 a month. His job involved repairing steam engines, a task for which he was highly qualified. These engines powered the electricity that lit thousands of homes in the city. His time at Edison Illuminating Company was crucial for understanding how electricity worked and for learning how to implement it. In 1893, He had his first and only son with Clara Edsel Bryant Ford. A few months after his son's birth, thanks to his outstanding performance, Henry was promoted to chief engineer, earning a salary of $100 per week. This position provided him with financial stability and the opportunity to pursue his interest in internal combustion engines. On July 4, 1896, Ford completed his first automobile powered by a combustion engine, the Ford Quadricycle. It was a lightweight vehicle made up of two bicycles placed side by side and powered by a gasoline engine. This prototype marked the beginning of his journey into the automotive industry. During this time, he met Thomas Edison, who supported his ideas. Henry decided to sell the quadricycle, and with that money, he began working on his second experimental vehicle, which he completed in July 1899. One morning, Henry Ford took a wealthy lumber merchant, William Murphy, for a ride in his new vehicle. Shortly after, Murphy and Ford shook hands, and in August 1899, the Detroit Automobile Company was born. However, the company failed due to high production costs and the low quality of its vehicles. This did not stop Henry. He decided to focus on race cars, which had become very popular at the time, seeking recognition to prove the quality of his vehicles. A year later, in 1901, Ford gained notoriety by building a race car called Sweepstakes and winning the first and only race of his life against the car of a nationally renowned manufacturer, Alexander Winton. After the race, Ford retired from racing, declaring, "Once is enough." The news spread quickly. The unknown engineer had defeated the best race car driver in the world. This helped him regain the confidence of investors and allowed him to establish a new company with Henry as chief engineer. However, it didn't last long due to disagreements over certain issues, and he was replaced from his position. This led Ford to resign.
I resigned, determined never to work under anyone's orders again.
With the support and backing of 11 investors, Henry's third company was born, initially named Ford and Malcolmson Ltd., though the name didn't last long. On June 16, 1903, in Detroit, Henry Ford officially established the Ford Motor Company with an initial capital of $28,000 under his leadership. After 2 failed attempts, Henry was more determined than ever not to fail again. This time, he focused on creating a car for the masses. After building 20 cars, he finally developed a functional one, which he named Model A. One day, during a trip to Chicago, Henry witnessed the concept of an assembly line in a slaughterhouse, and it sparked a brilliant idea. What if I could replicate this same dynamic in the construction of my vehicles? Could I produce more in a single day? He wondered. Following this revelation, in 1904, Henry built his own factory and began experimenting with the assembly line, employing more than 300 workers. In 1906, with his new car, the Model N, Henry Ford managed to increase vehicle production 5-fold by using the assembly line. Henry's dream was to create an affordable car for the average citizen, and the first step was this model, priced at $500, equivalent to $18,000 today. After establishing his own factory for engines and transmissions, Henry Ford discovered vanadium steel. This discovery paved the way for a new era in the automotive industry. But that wasn't all. With the release of the Model T in 1908, known as the Tin Lizzie, Henry Ford finally achieved his goal. The Model T was a highly reliable vehicle and easy to maintain. Despite its initial price of around $850, equivalent to $21,000 today, the Model T quickly became a favorite. Within days of its launch, Ford Motor Company had become the largest automobile manufacturer in the country. In 1910, after building his new plant in Highland Park, Michigan, and following numerous trials, the assembly line was finally operational by 1913. This innovative process reduced production time from a record 12 hours to just 90 minutes. On January 5, 1914, Ford implemented a revolutionary policy by offering a minimum wage of $5 per day, famously known as the $5 day. This was double the minimum wage at the time. What many business leaders mocked as financial suicide turned out to be one of the greatest game changers in history. On January 6, 1914, a day later, a crowd of more than 10,000 men gathered in front of the Highland Park plant of Ford Motor Company, seeking employment. Ford's decision attracted the best mechanics and workers in the region. It improved productivity, reduced employee turnover, an issue the company had been struggling with, enabled workers to afford the products they manufactured, and reduced the workday to 8 hours. All of this contributed to the creation of a middle class. between 1914 and 1916, thanks to the Model T and mass production, approximately half of all cars in the country bore Ford's name. By 1916, the Model T, which was once sold for $850, had its price reduced to less than $400. Negotiations began for the purchase of all Ford Motor Company shares, and by July 1919, the Ford family became the sole owner. Plans for global expansion were set in motion. It is estimated that between 1918 and 1920, Henry Ford caused half of the vehicles on the face of the earth to be Ford's, a record that remains unbeaten to this day.
Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black.
By the late 1920s, Ford Motor Company had expanded internationally, establishing plants in Europe, South America, and Asia. In 1927, production of the Model T came to an end after selling more than 15 million units. It was replaced by the new Model A, which featured a more modern design and improved performance. This new car was no longer manufactured at the Highland Park plant, but in a larger factory located in Rouge River, Michigan. In his new factory, Henry Ford wanted to oversee every step of the manufacturing process, from refining raw materials to the final assembly of the car, a goal he successfully achieved. Henry managed to turn his factory into the largest in the world, producing steel, glass, tires, and other components for the vehicle. In 1930, during the Great Depression, Ford faced criticism for its opposition to unions and its treatment of workers. In 1937, labor conflicts culminated in violent clashes, such as the Battle of the Overpass. Despite these challenges, the company survived the crisis. Unfortunately, in 1943, his only son, Edsel Ford, passed away from stomach cancer. Edsel had served as president of Ford Motor Company for over 2 decades, although during that time, his father never stepped out of the spotlight. In 1945, Henry Ford handed control of the company to his grandson, Henry Ford II, due to health issues. Although he retired from active management, his legacy as an innovator and entrepreneur remained firmly established. Henry Ford passed away on April 7, 1947, from a cerebral hemorrhage in Dearborn, Michigan, at the age of 83. His impact on the automotive industry and modern society is immeasurable, as he transformed production, transportation, and the global economy. Today, Ford Motor Company remains one of the largest automotive companies in the world.